Ah, there we go. Yeah.
Send it. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, good. It's not just me.
No, it's not. I just sent a text to Priscilla.
I'm so bad with computers that I thought it was me. This looks
No.
totally different than anything that was on me. Oh, I'm so glad to hear you, Margie.
I just sent a text to Priscilla.
I'm trying.
There's nothing we can do. I think it's on their end.
I'm very sure because or they've changed the format at Zoom. But I Zoomed with
Well,
my.
it's set up as a webinar now, but you know what? They're probably hearing us.
Well, good. I tried. I was going to be in person, but I'm just not up to it today. I really don't feel good.
Let's see if they're going to be able to do anything.
This is very frustrating.
Yes, it is. I don't know why it was set up as a webinar today.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you because I was thinking, what am I doing wrong?
Oops, hang on. I'm seeing if that's Priscilla. Mute for a minute.
Doesn't look like there were many MAC members there from the. Okay. Poor Priscilla, this must be absolutely frustrating.
So they can indeed hear us, everything we're saying. I'm going to try calling in and see what happens. So hang on, I'll get back with you. Pam, it's no better on the phone. Can you hear me, Pam?
Yes, I am
Okay.
seeing the agenda.
Okay.
And the sounds that I hear are just little blurbs of sound. They're not actual words.
So they're working on the issue and they can hear us. So we should probably just hang in there.
I'm hanging. I'll turn mute.
Can you hear me now? This is Jeff.
I hear Jeff. It's Pam.
Well, somebody asked me to unmute, so I tried that. So they apparently say can hear us, but
Hey, Jeff, we need to be quiet on this end. They can hear everything we're saying and they're working on it. Good.
The paratransit service operations update is on the screen.
Month over the past 2 months over
Mhm.
or under. We're
We
doing
hear you.
Oh, great, thanks.
internally, we're working on a lot of changes to how the individual passengers are in our program EcoLane, so that possibly like reevaluating it and seeing if we can push more trips to user to try to utilize them more. But currently, right now, like the month of May, I can reference, we pushed every trip that we could. But again, reminding the MAC that they're able to send back trips. So I can give an example fresh on my mind. Yesterday, we sent over 300 trips to them, but currently they're only doing 240 trips because they sent the other 60 back to us.
Mhm.
Either because one of their drivers didn't select the trips, or somehow it was still left unassigned.
Got it.
And there could be some cancellations that occurred in the meantime, just like with our trips that we have scheduled between last night and this morning when we started performing the trips. That caused the numbers to also decrease.
Yeah, got it. Actually, the reason for my question was I thought in the contract that there was a maximum number of trips, or at least percentage trips that you could ship over to them.
That is correct. It's 25% monthly.
Right, okay. And my question was, you're close to that?
We're right at it, either like
little
I said,
above or
a
a little
10% over or 10% under.
Got it.
We're trying to hit that 25% right on the nose.
Sounds good. Great. And my other question, again, looking at the on-time percentage for RT Go in April, I see that you're at 76%, if my eyes work. And have you, at this point, we've covered this before, but just to get another comment from you on it, the barriers that you have to getting that percentage up, do you want to say a word or two about that?
Yes, and I actually could give you some preliminary numbers for the month of May
Oh, okay, great.
on the on time.
Mhm.
I'll share also the ridership, just because the ridership and preliminary means I'm pretty close, like 99% on.
Okay,
But we did 26,724 trips combined for the month of May.
wow.
So that is actually the highest month of passengers, the highest month of passengers since pre-COVID.
Okay,
So you have to go, or actually post-COVID. So you have to go to pre-COVID prior to even get to those numbers.
right.
Our on-time performance, so in April was 76% for just SAC RT Go. For May, it's 81%. So some of the strategies that we put in place, the team over at SAC RT Go, kind of doing some regional type of commitment with the vehicles, looking at the flex shifts that we have and every other resource that we could find available at this time, because we still have some others that we're able to do at later dates. That basically gave us that 5% increase, because we started that the end of April. So
Yeah.
April wasn't really able to reflect the improvements that we did, but May was an entire month with all those improvements in place.
Sounds great. I know you talked about some of that last meeting, so I'm glad to see that it's having some effect.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from Richard from MAC members that are in the room? Yes, Frank.
How many drivers do you guys currently have, and how many more drivers do you still need for the SAC RT Go?
Currently we have 112 drivers. I believe over the past week, we have a couple of drivers that have been hired and are in the training program at this point. And we're funded for 115 and our bids are at 114. One of the challenges you have is the driver shortage. But as you can see, we're kind of doing pretty good on that area with about a 97% fill percentage. But our other challenges are the absenteeism. And that is really affecting us. So you have workers' comps, you have leave of absences, you have call-offs for sick, you have personal medical leaves. And so that is a number that is challenging us on a regular basis. And so we have just the regular floating holiday, like the pre-scheduled absences, and we don't have additional call-offs on that. We're doing pretty good percentage-wise on the on-time performance. And then the call-offs, if we have like 5, 6, 7 call-offs in a day, which has occurred in the past like month and two, that challenges us to keep that percentage up. But that's what we're looking at, like getting fully staffed so we can handle those a little better. And then looking at some other changes, that strategies that what I refer to that we possibly can do in the next month or two.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from MAC members in the room? Jeff.
Just really a comment on the on the user side. I think that one of the reasons that things are even going better than ever for YouServe is I've noticed that there are a lot of new YouServe drivers over the past few months, along with the older ones that have been around for a while. So I suspect that is even making it easier to shift those rides to the extent that is possible to do so, and we aren't going over the number. So I think, bottom line, YouServe appears to be doing an outstanding job.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions or comments from members? Okay. Oh, yeah. Now I'm going to the members on Zoom. Margie, is your hand up?
Yes, it is. I will now put it down so I don't forget. There we go. Hi, everyone. Glad we can finally hear you guys. Richard is aware of this and Carmen is aware of this. We met over a whole entirely different issue yesterday, but this topic came up, and that is that YouServe drivers are failing to put their signs on their vehicles. And while Richard understands the importance of it, I'm very concerned. I got home just before the meeting, got an email from someone in customer service saying that the YouServe drivers I sent in my concerns about sent a picture of their vehicle with the sign on it. Well, they absolutely were not on it on Sunday. I had a cited PCA. And so, Richard, I'm hoping you can address that, because that is not an answer to my complaint, since they were not on it on Sunday on either user vehicle. The other thing is, I see two ongoing issues with the Go drivers. And one is I know factually, and I'm not going to spill out any names here. There are drivers who use their sick leave once to twice a month just to take a vacation day. And I worked for the federal government, and we did two things with sick leave. Once it was you can it could be used towards your retirement. Then when the government changed it and it was use or lose, we saw a lot of call outs. Nobody had sick leave left. So I'm hoping that's something that RT can visit about, maybe incentives to not use your sick leave. That's most of the call outs. And secondly, we continuously see, especially newer drivers, wanting to go to big bus and or they have to go to community bus, then big bus, and then light rail is what I understand the chain to be, because Go doesn't pay nearly as much as big bus. There's quite a discrepancy in pay. And I'm going to just be quiet and hear what your comments are on that, Richard and or Carmen. Thank you.
Okay, well, the first one that I'll address is the signage on the user vehicle. So I did receive, after our conversation the other day when I got in, the email from user showing the pictures from the driver. And and then within minutes, I had my weekly meeting with the user and addressed it on the fact that when they call the driver, how do we know they're not running out, putting the signage on and then taking pictures? So we've created some agreements with users and some things that we internally can do to do some spot checking on it. But I did not appreciate seeing that on the fact of how do we know they were not, that they were still on there when the passenger, which was you in this case, Margie, was on the vehicle. So there's no way of confirming that. And so we have to figure out a way of addressing that. Let's see.
The pay issue.
Oh, the pay issue.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, that isn't really something I can address and
Right.
appropriate in this format. That's something internally we work on, and we have a process that we go through.
And I think if my memory serves correctly, that at the last meeting, Carmen made some comments about that. So.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add just on the one of the things that we do have a challenge with our drivers taking time off or working overtime is the fact that we're not able to require our drivers to do mandatory overtime, which is a little bit of a difference of the provider before us that was able to do it. So we're really have to work with our employees and see who can work or willing to work, and we're not able to force them to. So that's one of the challenges that we're up against and looking at our staffing and when we have a lot of people off on leaves and workers' comps and various other things.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I see another hand there. Is that Jeff Tardakia? You have a question on this topic, Jeff? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just a moment. Frank.
But if there's another Jeff before me, go ahead. But I'm on asking some questions.
On just a second, Frank.
I just want to comment. I represent the River City chapter of the National Federation of the Blind, and I'm only low vision. And I use 4 to 8 rides a week. 98% of user drivers do not have their signs on their cars. And I ask them why. They say because they don't have them.
Okay, is that
98% of the drivers do not have them. However, the driver who brought me today, Michael, he has it on his car. But 98% of the drivers do not have any signs on their cars except for Uber and Lyft on their windshield on the inside.
okay? And do they have, just a clarifying question, the SAC-RT Go logo on the side at all either?
No, not at all.
Okay, well,
A few of them did show me, they pulled them out of their glove box, but they're not on their vehicles.
this is a standing item on our agenda for the past 2 months with user. And one of the things that they got back to us was, we need more magnets. And we quickly ordered those and got them over 100 magnets of the SAC-RT Go. And the user, one of my understanding is their responsibility to have on. And let's see what day is it. So yesterday in my meeting with the regional director and their operating staff was, we need to make sure that this issue goes away. I've seen it too long. It keeps showing up in our complaints. It doesn't seem to be addressed when I'm interacting with them. And so now when I see those are coming in, I'm emailing that complaint directly to the regional director of users so that she knows it, besides it going through our normal complaint channel, because I want to really put a focus on the fact that this is their responsibility. We need to make sure these drivers are doing this, and not doing it is not going to be acceptable to SAC-RT.
Okay, one thing I also suggested last year when Priscilla and Ed joined our chapter meeting on a Saturday, October 8th, we asked them to ask them further about that. I'm not sure what's happening, but what I will start doing now is I'll start taking pictures of the drivers picking me up that don't have them, and I'll start filing complaints against that as well. And you'll see 4 to 8 rides a week. A lot of them don't have signs, even though they said they were told they don't have to put them on the cars.
Yeah, one of my comments back to user yesterday was, just because we received one complaint, that's the person that identified it and said, hey, I'm going to take my time and put the complaint in. How many other people are just accepting it, the fact they got the ride, and letting it go by? So that's my concern, is that it's a larger number than what the complaints are of the not compliant issue with the signage. And I'm definitely putting pressure on them, holding them accountable, and putting other strategies in place that internally we can do to monitor that.
Okay, thanks
Okay,
very
thank
much,
you.
Richard. Yeah, Frank. Okay, Jeff Tartagia, do you have a question on this topic?
Yes, there's 3 elements to it. And simply, if I understood correctly, there's 120 drivers. There is 250, shall we say, of this service lift. So going on daily, how many do you have coming back from the vendor? You said 60 for one day, but what is the normal monthly return on that? Is it 50? And you only have maybe 4 drivers in reserve? I just bring that question on that one. And then I have a possibility suggestion. Solution is you've got a lot of cameras out there, is when they get in, they take a picture and could show you exactly a common place to mail in about whether the tags are there, whether the signage is there. Have some dry riders do it, and then you'll have it isolated for a week of, hey, we did 250 and 200 of them did not have the signs up. It's just a suggestion.
Can't have all your rights.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Richard?
Well, on the number of returns from user, we don't really have a control over that. But even that's one of the reasons we are what we call like pushing or sending more trips than the 25% on a daily basis, because we know that some will be sent back. But as I stated previously early in my presentation, we're still right in within 1/10 of a percent of the 25%. So we're right there where we're able to be based upon, you know, the rules that we have to follow.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Richard? Seeing none, thanks very much, Richard. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you next month.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now then, let's move on to new business. And I need to shuffle things around here just a little bit. So the SAC-RT Sacramento County Emergency Response Planning efforts with Mark, and I am not sure how to pronounce your last name. Maybe you can help me out. He's from Police Services. Mark.
Good afternoon. Hi. Thank
And
you.
your last name?
It's Sakaue.
Sakaue.
Yeah, Mark Sakaue.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Sakaue. I've been with Regional Transit since about 1993, and I started the police services. And I was asked to come here today and discuss briefly about emergency preparedness. So I have a couple of slides, and any questions you may have during it or after it, feel free. Go ahead. So I'm going to talk just briefly our goals, how we prepare with other agencies, just some basic information on emergency management, some tips on individual preparedness. And then I had a slide with questions that were emailed to me from the MAC committee. Okay, next slide. So regional transit, real simple. What are our goals for emergency management? Number one, take care of yourself and your family. We want our employees that if they have something going on, if they're a victim to the fire, flood, or whatever disaster is occurring, that they take care of their family first. Secondly, if there's some big disaster, something going on, that we as a district are able to take care of ourselves, that we don't become a victim like in Katrina or other places where if we have to move our fleet from this area, which is in a flood zone, how do we do that and can we do that? And then third, we want to be able to respond to assist when asked upon by any government agency or anybody to help in a disaster. Next slide. So county evacuation, city evacuation, we've been involved in the planning process with all the government agencies since I could remember, probably back 20 years. And we've worked with them on everything. We always give input on these county and city evacuation plans. We also have MOUs with Sac County, Sac City, which we are currently updating. We have an MOU with Yolo County, and we also have an MOU with Elk Grove City. We have no state or federal agreements. From time to time with the fires, Cal OES will make an inquiry to us, but we've never done anything actually for them, and we have no agreements. Since we are a transit district and we don't fall under this government code 3100, we have the option when any emergency or disaster occurs to opt out. We could say, no, we can't do that. No, we're not going to do that. Unlike other places, firefighters, police officers, people that fall under this government code 3100, they have no option to opt out. They have to respond. So we have that option. Next slide. Some things about emergency management. What is an emergency or disaster? And it's very individual, but it's more of like this is more of an administrative thing. You've heard about, they declare emergencies, some locally, the city can, the county can, government agencies, not RT, but the city, the county, the state, they could declare emergencies for different types of things, everything from flood, fire, COVID, anything they want. And what that basically does is it frees up resources and creates other avenues to get help. One of the big things they do it for is it gives funding, and at what different levels from they'll give money to the state, they'll give money to the county, down to the individual, depending upon what kind of declaration they make. Just different kind of events, pre-planned versus reactive events. If you look at places like Florida with hurricanes, they see it coming, they know it's coming, so they could do a lot of pre-planning events. Same thing with fires. We see fires, we see where they are, we kind of predict the path, so we could kind of plan what to do. Other incidents like earthquakes, or if a dam breaks, that's kind of a reactive incident. How we respond to those is kind of similar, but very different in what we do. Who's in charge in an event? It depends. So if Sacramento City has an event and it's localized in the city, usually someone in the city, if they open their EOC, what we call Emergency Operations Center, somebody in the city will be in charge. And that'll usually be like a fire battalion chief or a police captain at that level once emergencies are declared. If it's a county-wide emergency on a larger scale, then all the county entities are involved, all the fire departments, police departments, and everybody within the county. Then it's usually like a city manager, deputy city manager, or maybe a police chief or fire chief that's in charge. Size of events, we've seen all this, local, county, state, national, worldwide pandemic events. That determines a lot what we do and how it's carried out and stuff. I just wanted to talk about the difference between rescue and evacuation. So regional transit will help with evacuations. That's like, they'll call us and we need to move so many people from one place to another. Rescue is when people need help, like the flood has come, the fire is there, they're on their roof, they're trapped somewhere. That's rescue, and that's purely a fire thing, and we have nothing to do with rescue. The one thing we've talked about with fire departments is, will we let them use our RT equipment to have like a firefighter who has a commercial license to drive in like a dangerous area, flood area, fire area, to use our buses. And that's up to RT at the time. So we've discussed that. But evacuations, we've discussed that a lot. We are in the evacuation plans for both the city and county, and we're prepared to do that. Just a little bit on evacuations. We've done different studies. I've worked with SAGCOG quite a bit and other transit agencies, and we believe that if there's a big event, probably about 75% of the people will self-evacuate. They have the ability, they have a vehicle, they have somebody that could take them. And then there's about 20% that may need help. So we kind of concentrate on that 20%. And then there's always the 5%. There's always the people in every disaster that refuse to leave. I'm not leaving, or I'm not leaving unless you take my horse. And then those individuals we kind of put to the side, but we at RT kind of concentrate, who are these 20%? Who are these people that we need to help move? And that's when we talk about the at-risk or mobility impaired segment of our population. And we don't know exactly what the number is. Maybe this committee could give us the number. I mean, it changes all the time. One of the things I have at the bottom, protection of information. People have asked for information before, and they don't want to give it up. Like, where are all the disabled people living in our community? I don't know. We don't have that information, so we don't know that kind of stuff. But one of the things we always suggest is everybody should have kind of pre-plans, especially if you have issues. You should have some plans. And I have another slide. I'll talk about that a little bit. Just a little bit, warning, advisories, mandatory evacuations. They talk about that all the time. If you're at risk or you have issues and they give a warning or advisory, the best that you should heed that. They say, hey, look, the fire may come here, the flood may come here. That's the time you leave. Because most people stay till they make it a mandatory evacuation. But if I had issues, my parents are elderly, they live here. If there's any kind of warning or I think it's bad, that's when I'd move them immediately. Okay, next slide. Some individual preparedness. You got to learn about the risks. What are the risks in this area? What are the threats? Sacramento floods probably our biggest risk. Fire maybe. And then you kind of take that and what's your vulnerability? Some individuals need refrigeration. They need to refrigerate their medications. They need power for a CPAP, power for a ventilator, whatever their vulnerability may be. I know like SMUD and PG&E, they both have plans for individuals with disabilities. One of my friends, they gave them battery backups for their CPAPs if they have those. I know other people have generators that kick on automatically. So I don't know what individual vulnerabilities are, but your plan should be prepared for that. Notifications, you should sign up for notifications. Notifications are basically opt-in kind of things. Does anybody sign up for those? County alerts?
Yep.
You should. So you cannot opt out of as a presidential alert. And they tried that. President Trump did that once, probably a couple years back. He was the first one. He sent out a nationwide presidential alert. So that's the only one you can't opt out of. The Amber alerts, every other thing you can opt in. Bay Area frequently, so I opt into the Bay Area County emergency alerts. They're not bad things to have. So I highly recommend that. Another thing I do, I monitor the news, weather, different things like that. It's a good thing, if there's fires nearby, it's just something you should keep track of and monitor from time to time. It's kind of my suggestion. Your goal is to minimize the impact if something happens. If there's a fire or flood, how do you minimize the impact to yourself? And there's no definite answers on what to do. Like if mobility is your issue, and you're in an apartment, you want to be on the first floor so you could evacuate and it's easier. But if a flood came and you had to shelter in place and you couldn't evacuate, it'd be better if you're on the second floor because then you're out of the flood place. I mean, everybody's individual, everybody's different, and everybody has to decide what's best for them. Shelter or evacuate is probably one of the biggest decisions. And for me, I almost always choose evacuate. Because shelter, once something happened, it's too late. And then you're not an evacuate, then you become a rescue. And that's a whole different kind of issue. Like I talked about the events, there's warning times. Sometimes there's a lot of warnings, sometimes not. Anyone have the MyShake app? So that's an early warning system for California. It's kind of based on Japan. Cal OES came here to RT and did a presentation on it. You could get the app on your phone and it tells you we had an earthquake probably a couple weeks ago by Chico, 5.5. They're still working with those things. They're kind of interesting. Places like Japan have it. And when the tsunami hits off the ocean, depending upon where it is, they have a lot of earthquakes. They have basically 30 to 60 seconds, depending upon where they are, to do something in regards to their earthquake. But they train to that. In California, we haven't reached that point where because what would you do? You have 30 seconds. You have to decide where you are and what you're going to do. Shelter, run, do something. Scope, you got to look at the scope of an incident, localized, county, state, how big is it? And you got to remember if something big is going on and it has nothing to do with us, but it's in Yolo County or a surrounding county, they take our resources here in Sacramento. So we'll have less resources here if something is happening nearby. When there's big fires, a lot of the fire resources from our area are drained. We still have some, but it's just something to be aware of. Duration, how long is an event going to last? No, that's something you got to plan for. And the severity of the event, some things are pretty minimal. We got smoke, we got heat, we got cold. Some things are extremely severe flooding, severe fire. Okay, next slide. I was sent these questions. What's RT's role in an evacuation of people with disabilities and seniors? So if there's a mass evacuation or some sort of incident where a city or county emergency operations center is opened, we will fall down in the organization chart. We will be a part of operations or logistics, and we'll be well below any decision-making process. They will say, hey, we need, the one thing that the city or county or the other places will tell us is, we need you to move X amount of people, because the one thing we ask is, how many people do you want us to move? Are they wheelchairs? What's the makeup of the people we want to move? Where do you want us to pick them up? And where do you want us to take them? And then we as a district will figure out how to do that best. We may transfer them to light rail. We may not. We may use big buses, little buses. It just depends on what they ask us to do. Our preparation, by law, we have to do emergency exercises every year, and we've done them ever since I've been here. We've done some pretty massive exercises here at Regional Transit. We get great participation from all the people in RT. We get great participation from, we've used Metro Fire, SAC Fire, Sheriff, Police, the FBI is involved, Homeland Security is always involved, the CPUC is always involved. So we do really good as far as preparation. And the biggest issue I've seen, I've been here a while, so is we have a turnover of personnel at Regional Transit. So we continually have to keep training like our superintendents, our supervisors, and people like that. RT's limitation to carry out these responsibilities, I think our biggest limitation will be personnel. If something happens and it's a prolonged event, then we will run it. That'll be our barrier. We'll have the equipment, but will we have the personnel to do it? Because like stated before, we're not emergency service workers, so we can't order the RT workers to do it. We have to ask for volunteers. Who's willing to do it? But the times we've asked for volunteers for different things, the RT, in my history, the RT drivers have always stepped up. If there's a need and there's an emergency and say, hey, we need something, they have always stepped up. I've never gotten, no, I don't want to do that. So I think that's a good thing to know. Asked about look at IHSS, other low-income recipients due to their program eligibility. No, we don't do that. And are we looking at the responsibility and context in the entire community of transit-dependent folks? Like I said, in the org chart, we'll be down. The decisions about who to evacuate, in what order to evacuate, that's completely up to whoever's in charge of the event. And that almost will never be us. And we've reached out to different places, like there's a lot of care homes in Sacramento. And I've asked them, what's your plan? If you need to evacuate, I mean, we've done exercises with everyone familiar with the pocket area of Sacramento. So that's a pretty big area. It's surrounded by a river. And if the levee broke any place along there, the pocket would flood because it's like a big bowl. I mean, if the levee breaks at Watt Avenue and the water starts flowing, it will flood the pocket area of Sacramento. If you've looked at the flood inundation maps, they have those on the city websites. It'll always flood the pocket. And there's a number of care homes, schools. So we've had, what will you do? And some of them don't have plans. Some of them, most care homes, their plan is to whatever employees are there, they'll take as many of the patients they can, put them in their personal cars and leave. And that's a plan most places in the nation, because most people don't have a bus or something ready to come pick them up. So next slide. So that's my basic. I'm free to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Are there any questions by MAC members here in the room? Helen?
Yes, I have a question. If we know we need to be evacuated and we have all our stuff together, but we have no way to get a hold of anybody to come pick us up, like if we're wheelchair dependent, where do we go?
So the one thing is the notification. So if you have no communication, I mean, if there's ever an emergency, you call 911. I mean,
And then
that's-
they will figure out how to get us out.
Yeah, and it depends. If you look at the different disasters that have occurred, and nothing is 100%, nothing is fail safe. There's no guarantees. When that earthquake hit Chico, 911 in Chico went out. There was no 911. So one of the things we always advise, and we advise this for everybody, it's if you have neighbors or anybody, or if you're at risk, you reach out. You got to have some sort of network if you can, to like, hey, if there's a power outage, just be advised, I need a backup generator for these medical things. I need whatever these may need. And it could be your neighbor. If one of my neighbors came to me and said, I need something, I'd keep an eye on them. And then I would know if the power goes out for them, it's probably out for me. If they get a flood of, I'll get the same warnings they will. So the neighbor helping neighbor is probably one of the keys to that kind of thing. And then what'll happen if it's a localized event, it's really not that we have the resources to handle that pretty good. But if it's a big event and there's massive flooding, then it's going to be up to the county or city execs to determine who gets evacuated. So I always say worst case scenario, what's your plan? What's your plan if I'd say you got to have some flood plan, whatever it may be. So I don't think I really answered your question, but so what other follow-up questions do you have to that?
No, I just, I would probably try to call paratransit and find out if they have any vehicles available to evacuate a wheelchair bound person.
So if it's an evacuation, the police department will go down the street too. And they'll talk over their loudspeaker or
Right.
something. And I would definitely go out into the street if you're capable, just so the cops see you.
Yeah,
And because like I said, we always know, we hope that 75% of the people will get the text, the alert, the reverse 911 phone call, and they'll leave. We know that there'll be a percentage of people that are still there and need assistance. We want to minimize that number of people that need assistance. So I would go out into the street, do whatever I can. If your neighbors are leaving, try and get a ride. And you got to remember one thing for rescue versus evacuation. Evacuation, we will take your stuff. RT, we could take your chair. We take, service animals. We're good with all that. But in the event of a rescue, they're just going to take you.
right.
They're not going to take anything else. They're not going to take your chair. They're not going to, they may be able to, but rescue is, we're on a time crunch and we got to get as many people out of the water as we can. So we're not going to spend time taking other stuff. That's why the time, as soon as you hear something is when you leave.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeff?
So I want to ask a question not about what is, but about what could be. Could there be an agreement between appropriate parties, county, say, and RT, whereby once an evacuation order is, declared through the appropriate channels and you get the boundaries, et cetera, that people that Sacramento riders in that area would be called by, and to the extent resources were available, evacuated. Because that's what I think. You're talking about transit dependent people and you want people that are clearly at the top of that particular food chain, because you're not going to get everybody. But that's the sort of thing that you would think that RT would want to be doing. Is there any legal reason why they couldn't be such a protocol?
So a legal reason, not that I can think of. I don't know that I'm an expert in that. So let's say the evacuation order was given. Do we at Sacramento have the phone numbers of all our customers?
Certainly RT Go you do. Yes,
I mean,
they have
that's-
all
That's a
RT Go phone
right. I
numbers.
mean, you have the database.
Do we have somebody that could actually do the phone calls?
Well, I imagine you could have a reverse 911 issue or something. You could probably, there's probably a way.
I'm
Do that
sure that
automatically.
There's definitely a way to do things like
Yeah.
that. Like I said, one of our things would be personnel. So if there's the mandatory evacuation order, we're a tool in the toolbox for whoever's running the event. I mean, that's kind of where we sit. We're not at in an event like that operates under standard emergency management protocols in the state of California, in the county of Sacramento. Nationwide, we all operate under the same premise, what we call the standard emergency operation. And in that event, we are placed down in the org chart. We're a resource. And we cannot, under those circumstances, take independent action and do things once we're in that, or we could. There's not, we're not supposed to. How's that?
So I understand that, but I'm also a consultant on OES, so I have a little knowledge in this area. And I suppose what I would say to you in rebuttal is that perhaps this is the sort of thing we ought to be recommending that the county and SAC-RT think about entering into as part of their agreement. Because clearly, we understand that there's limited resources. We understand that things may not be able to work just the way we'd want to. We understand that people are volunteers under the way these things work. But given all these limitations, it seems to me that we could be putting into place a much better system if we had some kind of an agreement ahead of time. And I'm not fully blaming RT for this, because obviously it's got to be part of seems to me we ought to be thinking about something like that.
No, I agree with what it's having been in the incident command system and it's when you take a location and I'll use the pocket and it's this time of the day and the levee broke and we have to start rescuing and evacuating people. Somebody has to make a decision on who gets evacuated or who gets rescued first. And that's not going to be us at RT, but I agree with the discussion should happen. Absolutely. And it should happen before, but this is my opinion now, because I can't speak for whoever's in charge. I can't speak for the city council, county soups or anything like that. They tend to put more of their resources towards the elementary school and the preschool. Let's get those kids out of there. That's what I've seen. It's like, okay, what are we going to evacuate? We got 10 ambulances. We got 40 needs. Who are we going to take? And that's not our call. And then when the emergent, we could have these pre-agreements, which I think that's a great idea, like you suggested. But once the event happens, every event is different. It's going to be up to whoever she is in charge, that decides what incident action plans they're going to take and what they're going to do. And that's just kind of how it works. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm frankly really disturbed, and this is not a reflection on you personally.
No,
But
absolutely.
I'm very disturbed at the lack. I mean, we part of what is done by this to every county, and every county has to tell them what their methodology is going to be for evacuations. And I understand why one of the things we realize is that there's very little meat on the bone, but I thought there was more meat on the bone than this.
Jeff, a quick question for you, or Mark. Where do you think this discussion should be raised? Would it be OES, or would it be with city council, or?
So both
Council and the Board of Supervisors, it's a local matter, really.
Right.
yes, I
But
agree.
it also seems, just spreading the horizons a bit, that it's probably one of those things that does need to be balkanized throughout the state. But within the county, it seems like the Board of Supervisors would be a good place to raise the issue.
So both the city and county and most cities have an emergency coordinator. Sacramento County has an emergency coordinator. The city of Sacramento has an emergency coordinator. That would probably be the best place to start. But I think city council and county board of supervisors, absolutely, because if they direct them to do it, then they will do it. In the different city, it's just different. Like every city, like the county has a emergency coordinator, then every city, depending upon the size, has an emergency coordinator. If you take a county like Los Angeles, they have 400 of them. If you take a county like Mono County, they got one person and she's also the fire chief and police chief. I mean, size really matters, but Sacramento is big enough to where we have individuals dedicated to being the emergency manager. And that's the person I would ask these questions to.
Jeff, why don't you and I offline have a chat about this and see
Okay.
if we can't figure out some place to shake the tree and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks
that
very
make
much
sense?
for that.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions from people in the room here? Then I'll go to the virtual. Yeah.
First of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
And second, is there when you were talking about like a list of all the different things that people might need in an emergency situation, is there a recommended website or
Sure,
a recommended app or?
Yeah, there's a
something like
lot.
that?
So Cal OES, they're a good place to start. FEMA has a lot of stuff. FEMA learned a lot from Katrina. They didn't do a great job there. So Cal OES, FEMA, and then Sac County, saccounty.net. They also have resources, and also Sac City does. If you just emergency preparedness, and if you actually go on Cal OES, the state site, emergency disabled community, they have specific documents for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff Tardikia, I'll come to you. One question, and then we need to move on.
My question revolves around some years ago, the light rail went out and you had a disabled person in there. Will you, as being emergency services, ever have the contact, or is it going to be simply the fire department? And do you have a recommendation for what they needed to do? The person was in an electric wheelchair, and they had to do a fireman's hold to get him out of the light rail vehicle, but then they had no place to put him with it. So just wondering if you come up with some ideas, and when was the last time RT actually did a emergency flooding, or it was most likely, I think, here in Sacramento, that you were involved?
I'm sorry, an emergency. What was your last question?
When in Sacramento, were you around when they actually had most likely a flooding where you were called on to be of service? RT was called on to be of service.
Okay, so I'll go back. So a person on a wheelchair, a train is disabled. It depends on where it is. If it's in the station, then we could take it. If there's a ramp of it, if the train is dead and there's no ramp that we could take the person off with, then it's a fire issue. And I've seen us, and we have done that. We'll call the fire department. And because we're not trained to lift, depending upon the weight of the person in the chair, to take that person safely off down the light rail. So that is a fire thing. And if they had no place to put that person, that would be kind of surprising that they would just leave that person. I mean, that doesn't sound right at all.
Right.
I don't understand that. I mean, we're not going to leave a person in the station with a dead. I don't know. Fire should take care of that. That's their job. So, and then the last time we had real flooding in Sacramento was like in the 80s. If you remember Del Paso Heights, Rio Linda flooded. That was the last time we had real flooding where National Guard came out and we did different things. But other than that, we've been pretty lucky. There's been some localized flooding different places, but we have not had to do a mass evacuation. Does that answer your question? Questions?
Thank you. You did an excellent job. I've been on the state board and know what they have done dealing with disability people and how they pre-select rooms and what they brought the Red Cross in to get better knowing what to do for the disabled community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, Mark, thank you very much for a great presentation. Really.
Thank you. If you have any other questions, reach out to Priscilla and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you. Have a good day.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, moving on now to the presentation from SACOG, the blueprint presentation. James Corliss, he's the Executive Director at SACOG. James.
Thanks very much for having me again. James Corliss, Executive Director at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. I assume you know who we are, but just in case you don't, we represent all the 28. I appreciate the conversation now about cities and counties, but the 28 cities and counties in the greater 6-county Sacramento region. And I wanted just this afternoon to give you a little bit of an update on our long-range plan. We do many things at SACOG, but one of the things that we are required to do and take very seriously is looking into the future and planning for the entire region around transportation, housing, land use, economic development. So I want to give you a little bit of a preview and a summary about where that stands, and then just actually run through some of the initiatives that are the ways in which we are trying to implement our long-range plan that we think may be of interest to you. So next slide. So again, Council of Governments, we're a joint powers authority. There's a Council of Governments just about sort of all across the country, just had the big national conference. There's over 300 of them. We cover these 6 counties on the map: Sacramento, Yolo, Yuba Sutter, Placer, El Dorado, and all the cities within. It's a 31-member board representing 28 cities and counties. Interestingly, we have every single jurisdiction on our board of directors. That's somewhat unusual. There's usually rotating seats. But for us, every jurisdiction sits on the board. So next slide. So we are calling our long-range plan that every region in the nation and every region in California under state law has to create with a very long name: the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. We sometimes we revert into acronym mode and say MTSES as if anybody would know what that means. We are now this year, we branded it Blueprint, both because we think it's an important sort of reference to trying to design and think about and create and build the future. But it also harkens back to a process some of you may know about 20 years ago in this region called Blueprint, which is when the region came together and the forecasts for the future were really bad. We were going to be spending billions of dollars for traffic to get worse, transit to get worse, air quality to get worse. And so the region came together and voluntarily said, we have to grow differently, got to think differently about our future. So that was 20 years ago. Our region adopted that 20 years ago. We're now trying to bring that kind of idea and philosophy back into our long-range plan called the Blueprint. So next slide. We're using and starting with a triple bottom line framework around the Blueprint. Many people think of SACOG as a transportation planning agency, and absolutely, we do a lot of transportation planning. We work closely with RT. We try to win state and federal grants for all kinds of great transit projects. But we're trying to back up a little bit, and even as an agency, think about advancing a triple bottom line framework, by which we mean advancing social and racial equity, narrowing income and race ethnicity disparities, advancing a prosperous economy in the region that is diverse, that doesn't go through the kind of roller coaster years we've had through the Great Recession and the pandemic. And finally, a sustainable environment, which for us means reducing pollution in all forms, improving air quality, and getting ready for climate change and adapting to climate change. So next slide. And as I mentioned, a lot of our plan is transportation. In fact, if there are any projects in our 6-county region that use federal or state funds, or they are so-called regionally significant projects, they must show up in our plan. So that is a requirement. You've got to be in our plan for transportation. And we also have a very specific kind of growth and housing and land use plan that underpins that. I will say one thing about transportation, among many, I could say. I've been here now for 6 years. Before this, I ran a national group called Transportation for America. We were based in DC, trying to get Congress to pass a big transportation infrastructure bill. They did that a couple of years ago, as you know. In our region, in the Sacramento region, we have a lot more desire for transportation projects than we will ever have money. We have a lot more desire for projects than we will ever have money. And when it even comes down to something like public transportation, we're going to have to make significant trade-offs and have some tough decisions around expand light rail, fix buses, bus rapid transit, frequency versus coverage. All of these issues, I think you always deal with and we think about here. That doesn't mean we don't need new revenue sources, and we want to get more funding for things like public transit and fixing streets and potholes. But one of the things that we have to do in this planning process is really come up with a financially constrained plan. And so we have to actually look at which are the projects that are most cost effective, whether they're roads, they're transit, they're bike paths, or fixing sidewalks. And the other tension we have, we are the fastest growing region in California by the last census. How much new growth and new infrastructure are we planning for and paying for versus fixing our existing streets and sidewalks in our existing communities? So it's a very simplistic way to put it, but that is a very inherent challenge that we're going to need as many people and voices to help us through. Okay, next slide. Keep going. Next slide. Thank you. Okay. One thing that we're just actually about to, we've been working on, our staff's been working on a lot, is we're basically developing different scenarios for how we might grow in the future. So our population now is about 2.5 million over the 6 counties. We forecast by the year 2050, which is the horizon year of our plan, we'll get up to about 3.1 million people. So we'll roughly grow about 500,000 plus. Where that growth takes place, where that housing is developed, what kind of housing, for whom, and how affordable is really critical to understanding the future of our region, the success of our region. And just this gives you this map here, gives you some sense. We've got 3 different scenarios we're looking at, and we're running through our transportation models and our air quality models. One is a scenario where we really don't spread out much more. We really actually infill and refill and build more housing and affordable housing in existing communities, urban and suburban. One is the other sort of end of that spectrum is we actually aren't successful at revitalizing our communities, and we spread out. And we spread out in this map on the light blue areas, and we don't really grow on the existing developed footprint. And then we have a middle scenario that's about a mix of those 2 things. So we look at those 3 growth scenarios. And by the way, just even for your last presentation, as you might imagine, the spreading out scenario has a lot of growth now, and that would put a lot of growth into flood risk areas and high fire risk areas. Okay, so next slide. So I think really what I wanted to just get now into a couple of the projects that we're working on that we think will be of interest. All of these projects really do help implement our long-range plan. In terms of our blueprint, obviously happy to answer questions. We have a board meeting next Thursday where we'll actually be walking through some of the transportation results of those 3 pathways. And I think they would be very interesting to you because we're looking at things like traffic congestion, transit success, right? How many people live within a half mile in these different scenarios of a rapid transit corridor or a transit stop? What kind of ridership do we see in the future? So that'll all be shared with our board at our board meeting, our monthly board meeting next Thursday morning at 9:30. And then the following day on Friday, June the 16th. And I do believe that this is actually a sold out event, but do be in touch with me if you're interested, and we'll see what we could do. We're doing a big workshop around this blueprint plan, and it's really a check-in with our region's elected officials, agency staff, community-based organizations, folks like yourselves, come together at the Folsom Community Center and sort of understand where we are. Okay, I'm going to run through a few projects. I might skip some of these because I'm mindful of your time and I don't want to hold you up too much. So we work with all the region's transit operators, including Sacramento RT here, to look at what kinds of routes and markets, especially across county lines, do we see a demand for both now and in the future. So the map in front of you shows this kind of gray network, which is our existing, largely our kind of backbone, more frequent transit service across all 6 counties. And if you hit to the next slide, we are looking at the following. This is part of our next generation transit initiative, where SAC-RT is heavily involved. A lot of our other partners. So we're looking at longer high capacity transit corridors for future service. Some of this is already served. For example, Davis to Sacramento, Auburn, Woodland to Sacramento, Yuba City. Again, I know there's a lot of service that is here, but we're looking at this in terms of future demand. If we're going to grow by 500,000 people, and we service some of these corridors and this demand through public transportation. Next slide. And then we have medium high capacity transit corridors. I'm not going to read all of these because there's lots of arterials and lots of streets and corridors all over, in particular Sacramento County, but in some sense to Roseville and Southern Placer County, where we think actually faster, more frequent transit service will make a big difference. And I will tell you this, as somebody who has worked at the national level, but also in metropolitan regions around the country, I'm a big believer in making buses work better and faster. And I think we have a huge opportunity in bus rapid transit to do dedicated lanes, signals that trip. And I'm very excited by RT's efforts with the city and county of Sacramento to look at line 51 as one of the first Stockton Boulevard bus rapid transit corridors. We have other corridors. There's challenges in this. It's a lot cheaper than expanding light rail to build bus rapid transit, but we have to work really closely with our cities, counties, and members of the public, because we're going to have to, at some point, take dedicated right-of-way to give dedicated right-of-way to buses and potentially other modes of transportation. So those are medium corridors. Like, keep going on the slides, please, if you can. And then short local distance trips, other corridors here for you as well. So next slide. And then there's the hubs. There's the idea of, if you've probably heard about Sacramento Valley Station, the vision for the downtown Amtrak station is that for it to be like a mega regional hub, really. Where all kinds of transit services would connect with the Amtrak Capitol Corridor, hopefully in the future, high-speed rail. But there's a lot of other places where these kinds of hubs and different transportation services, the sort of term of art people use now is mobility hubs, but where different forms of transportation could be available around these kind of key connections and key hubs. And working closely again with SAC-RT, SMUD, and the Air District actually here in Sacramento County on what those hubs might look like, where they might be located, what kinds of transportation services you might have at them. But you can see there's a ton of opportunities in these sort of red circles all across our region. So next slide. Okay, I want to just touch on a few other things we have going. Actually, I'm coming back to the full SAC-RT board, I believe, on Monday evening to do a joint presentation on Sacramento Regional Transit's TOD, transit-oriented development strategy to build more housing and development around the stations, corridors, and light rail stations, and the SACOG, which is what we call our Green Means Go program. I mentioned that kind of tension between revitalizing and building more housing and affordable housing close to where people and jobs already are. There's a number of challenges to doing that, so-called infill development or revitalization. We lost the redevelopment as a financing tool about 12 years ago at the state level. We really need to upgrade infrastructure really badly, water, sewer, utility, in order for some of this housing to be able to pencil. We created a program called Green Means Go. We won $34 million in state funding about 18 months ago, and we just awarded that this spring. Our board just made, happy to say one of those is on the 51 Stockton Boulevard corridor, the San Juan Motel Apartments, new affordable housing project right between straddling city and county, and about 20 other sites all over the region to be able to try to spark new housing. So this Green Means Go strategy, it's very unique. It's very bottom up. It's kind of like the blueprint was 20 years ago. 28 of our 28 jurisdictions support it, and 26 have adopted these kind of infill areas where they want to see more housing. We're trying to get the state and federal government to really be investors in this beyond the 34 million we've won. That again, we could really begin to try to make the market work for housing and affordable housing along these older corridors. Okay, next slide. We're also very excited about the possibility of trails in this region. So when I say this, I mean kind of class 1 paved trails. We've got, some great examples, right? Everybody thinks of the American River Parkway. People think of some of the things in Folsom and Roseville. But if you really take a step back in the region and you look at our trail network, it's a patchwork quilt and it's not connected. And the ability for us to connect these networks, these trail networks, really begins to give you these kind of exponential benefits. Don't quote me on this, but I think even just within Sacramento County, and you can see this sort of slide up here represents these major trail corridors that in green, the ones that are like planned, and I think purple are sort of study corridors that we want to try to look at with our local partners. I believe if we could get this trail network built in Sacramento County, we increase like 250,000 people who would live near a trail with a half a mile of a trail network throughout the county. It would be a game changer. Next slide. We have first last mile options in terms of bike share and scooters. And I know sometimes those are not necessarily seen as great things because they can be actually, if we don't manage them well, they litter the sidewalks and they present serious barriers. We're trying to work with all of our jurisdictions on that. Next slide. This is something we're very excited about, which is there's more money than ever before for zero emission transportation fleet conversion. So we have an MOU with Sacramento Regional Transit, SMUD, and the Air District. We have a whole strategy to go to zero emission and accelerate that transition, looking at of course, the transit fleet, trying to go to zero emission with 600 ZEV buses and charging and refueling facilities. You probably hear all about that, but also looking at medium duty and heavy duty, which is actually an even tougher nut to crack. We're trying to be agnostic on fuel pathways. Is it electrification? Is it hydrogen? I mentioned these mobility hubs, but to make sure that these future mobility hubs around transit stations are really provide clean mobility options like electric vehicles and electric car share, and then looking really at the workforce benefits as well, and trying to make sure we're working with a lot of our job training partners and community colleges so that we get the upside economically and jobs wise from this transition, which is underway and is already underway and only accelerating. So next slide. Our board has made a pretty significant commitment to equity and community engagement and racial equity. We did not do very much work on this. I'm going to tell you right now, we have needed to be much better about public engagement and community engagement. We're starting that though with a program called Engage, Empower, Implement. Our boards put $3 million into a community planning program really focused on lower income communities, disadvantaged communities, all across the 6-county region. We're going to be rolling that out this fall for these kind of community engagement grants. Next slide. Just to wrap up here, I'm almost done. We think about our 6 counties, but we also think increasingly too about our 16 counties, the Northern California mega region. We also have a formal working group with our sister agencies in the Bay Area, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, just the south of us, San Joaquin County, and the San Joaquin Council of Governments. And together we've identified 12 transportation investments, including things like the Capitol Corridor, both down to the South Bay, but also up to Roseville and Placer County. The ACE and the San Joaquin Rail Service, which is actually going to be coming up here from South Bay, the Tri-Valley, Stockton. We'll get service, hopefully arriving here and opening in the end of 2024. That service will stop in Elk Grove, Midtown, Old North Sacramento, Elkhorn Boulevard for an airport connection. And then we're working with Butte County to look at extending that north up to Plumas Lake, Marysville, Gridley, and Chico. And that would actually get you north-south, because while high-speed rail is a game changer, we're at the very end of the line, literally, for high-speed rail. It may never happen in my lifetime, but we would love medium-speed rail. Medium-speed rail that would be competitive with a car would be great. And we think that Northern California could honestly build a network approaching, maybe not equivalent to those that they have in some European countries. But this is very exciting stuff. And we're working a lot with a lot of our elected officials on this as well. So next slide, which I think should be my last. All right, good slide to end on. We have a Youth Leadership Academy. This has been going 5 years strong now. We take high school students from across the 6 counties, and we basically try to walk them and introduce them to regional planning challenges. And we try to get them excited both to be kind of civic leaders and future leaders and one day sit around our board table as elected officials, or also think about a career in transportation planning, regional planning, housing, you name it, because this is, I believe, a growth industry. It's a great profession. It's an important one to improve people's lives. So we love our high school students. We're doing a big celebration next Friday as well for 5 years. And with that, I hope that's a helpful sense of what we're up to at SACOG, the importance of this new long-range plan we have called the Blueprint, and some of these initiatives that we have to implement the Blueprint that we've been working on. So would be delighted to take any questions you have.
Many thanks, James. And due to time constraints, I want to limit questions to about 5 to 7 minutes here. So first of all, thank you. I'm impressed by the scope of what you folks do, all the way down to, local trails to rail corridors from San Jose to Chico. I mean, it's amazing. So thank you for the overview. One question I have is, now that I understand that in 2025, you will be coming out with a new blueprint as you were.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what I was, my first couple of
highlighting.
slides on the Blueprint, that's the plan. That will,
Right.
it takes a good 3 years to actually develop that and adopt it. So we're looking at board adoption in October of 25, fall of 25, which actually will line us up with the Bay Area plan cycle as well. So we'll be in sync with the Bay Area. But that's the one that I mentioned, the event next Friday, which I believe is sold out, but that's not the only chance to engage. We have online surveys. We'll have a lot of ways in which you all can engage in helping inform the Blueprint plan, because we're going to be working on it for 2 more years.
Very good. Okay. Are there any questions from MAC members that are here in the room? Okay, seeing none. Any MAC members online that have questions? I see none. Okay, Jeff Tartakia, one question, please.
My question is dealing with, you have the most direct dealing with the region in commuter lines. The Bay Area and Los Angeles region has claimed less than 50% and a concern. Is that a concern about what we're doing with our commuter lines and pre-pandemic to now that it's basically stayed less than 50%?
Jeffrey, are you talking about express bus? When you say commuter lines, are you talking about express bus lines that kind of go along?
Yeah, and comparing it, well, the only reason I have just recently got a notice that both LA and San Francisco is trying to get the state to pay in like they did with the pandemic, because
sure.
they get less than 50% now of people coming in. And I'm wondering if that's an impact that's going to take place in Sacramento.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? So, and I think the SAC-RT staff here and your other agencies like YOLO TD and YOLO Bus are really well positioned to answer this. But essentially what's happened, I mean, transit in the last 50 years has been on this roller coaster in the United States, right? We've had boom times and bust times. And the pandemic has really done a number on ridership and finances. Probably what you're referring to maybe with 50%, Jeffrey, is, and I used to work in the Bay Area. So BART, for instance, has a 50% fare box revenue. BART is in a world of hurt and in a bit of a fiscal spiral. But they're not the only ones. LA as well has lost a lot of ridership that hasn't come back, and they rely heavily on fare box revenue. So people paying fares. So when those people don't show up, that's really tough on them. There is a whole effort at the state level, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I think it's a good thing to be involved in. Try to get some, as you say, Jeffrey, emergency support for operating assistance for public transportation. Largely state and federal funds comes in the form of capital. So buying buses, expanding light rail, not so much in the form of operating. We did get some COVID and CARES Act money that sort of stopped the bleeding, if you will, a little bit. But that's running out now. And I think we're not quite where the Bay Area and LA is, but perhaps that might be the case if we don't change things 2-3 years from now. So that's a big statewide effort. I know Senator Scott Wiener is leading a lot of efforts in the legislature to try to get some one-time funding to help transit operators across the state. So pay attention, stay tuned to that one.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, James, many thanks again. Really appreciate you coming over here.
Thank
for having
you. Great presentation. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right, moving on to the Stockton Boulevard implementation plan. And we have Kevin Schroeder, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Appreciate the time. And I know we're at 4 o'clock and you have a couple items after us. So we will try to keep it within 15-20 minutes. I have with me today Thaddeus from Nelson Nygaard. He's a principal with that firm. He will be leading the presentation. But before I pass it over to him, I just wanted to give a brief update about this plan. It's the first time you're seeing it. We had a very limited budget to work with Nelson Nygaard to just specifically look at Stockton Boulevard for improvements to crossings and bus stops along this corridor. You may or may not know it's one of our highest riding corridors. There's 7 routes that connect, and it's a disadvantaged community. So over the past couple of years, there's been lots of planning by the city and county to look at this area, but there hasn't been much action. So about 1.5 years ago, under the guise of James Boyle, who no longer is with us, we went after assistance with Nelson Nygaard to look specifically at this corridor. It's similar to what James Drake has provided in the past about the bus stop improvement plan for the entire system, where he looked at 600 bus stops. But we really want to just focus on this corridor because, as the presentation will show, they've been just studying year after year after year, but not much action. So we actually wanted to go a little bit further and look at just the bus stops and say, if we could fund it ourselves, if money came through that wasn't multi-millions of dollars, could we make some improvements now? And what would that look like? Because at this point in time, we don't have any cost estimates. We don't have any suggestions of what would be the top priority bus stop to be improved if we were able to win a grant, or if we were able to partner with even a local business or something like that that wanted to fund something of this type. So just kind of keeping in mind that as we go through the presentation, it very much is conceptual. When we started this plan about 1 year ago, there were some ups and downs trying to get it going. But once we started, there was no notice of actual funding coming along. But as you just heard from SACOG, we actually do have some funding coming up in the next year to study the environmental of this corridor. It's going to be a lot more than just the bus stops, but it is a great document for us to finally present to more than just our own internal staff, which we expected this document to be, just an internal document conceptually looking at how to improve it, but now we can push it forward a little bit to the city, county, and STA and say, hey, we have a guiding document, a conceptual idea. Can you work with us? Can we modify it so it works for your funding type and also the corridor in general? So I just kind of want to bring that up, that this is not the last time you'll see improvements, or this document is not a end all be all. It's like a reading document. It will be modified as the environmental begins in the next couple of years. In that process, they'll come back to the MAC and give opportunity to review what the corridor looks like, not just bus stops, but the entire corridor, sidewalks, lanes, vegetation, things of that sort. So just kind of giving the context of what this plan is meant to be. And maybe I'll pass it over to Thaddeus to maybe give a quick introduction of who he is, and then we'll get right into it, knowing that there's limited time. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Once again, I'm Thaddeus Wozniak. I'm a principal at Nelson Nygaard. My background is on transit corridor projects and bus stop and civil improvements. And so we've been supporting Kevin and SAC-RT in this effort here along Stockton Boulevard. The next slide shows the project goals. The goal here, and Kevin alluded to some of this already, is that we really wanted to identify capital and operational improvements along Stockton Boulevard, specifically kind of distinct and smaller scale projects that would improve station accessibility, improve equity with respect to the stations, improve connections to the community from the stations. And then through the process, we wanted to identify the impacts of said improvements, develop costs, go through a prioritization process to identify which bus stops were in most need. And then prepare for, this whole effort was to prepare and position for potential funding for implementation. Next slide, please. So as Kevin mentioned, there have been a lot of past and ongoing activities along Stockton Boulevard. Our project, the Stockton Boulevard Implementation Plan, is really looking at spot improvement projects at station locations along Stockton Boulevard to improve the existing conditions and make them more accessible and equitable, and also in a kind of shorter term time frame than some of the other activities. The Stockton Boulevard Corridor Study was a previous complete street study that looked at just within the city of Sacramento boundaries, looking at complete street improvements, basically from right of way to right of way line. And we did use that as a reference point and a guidance in developing this plan. There is also a working version Stockton Boulevard plan that's looking at other improvements more kind of in the Stockton Boulevard area and not as specific on Stockton Boulevard itself. And then the Stockton Boulevard BRT and multimodal corridor project that you heard mentioned in the SACOG presentation and from Kevin. And this is another longer term look at more transit priority, building off of the complete street study and other multimodal corridors. Both the BRT project and the project we're working on right now, how it does differentiate from the corridor study, the Stockton Boulevard corridor study, is that it extends beyond the city limits. So both of these include Stockton Boulevard within the SAC-RT operating area and not just within the city. And then SAC-RT is also doing a bus stop improvement plan on a system-wide level, but as noted before, this is the highest ridership corridor. And so this study takes a little closer look at specific improvements along Stockton Boulevard, given the higher ridership. Next slide, please. So the report that's being developed is broken into 5 main sections. We talk a little bit about existing conditions just to kind of set a baseline. And then there's a discussion about proposed treatments that could be implemented along the corridor. These include improvements both at bus stops themselves, but as well as making access improvements and access treatments in order to better get to the bus stops themselves. We talked a little bit about the community coordination, which I'll talk about on our next slide. And then went through a section that discussed how we evaluated the needs at each bus stop and arrived at the prioritization of the bus stops. And then a final section that kind of summarized the proposed station improvements at each location. Next slide. We had several community outreach activities and touch points through this process. The first was the Spotlight on Stockton Boulevard event on October 8th of 2022. The scope of this project was to really try to leverage existing community outreach events and participate in other events that were going on, as to not facilitate outreach fatigue within the community, and to try to basically efficiently use the time of the constituents in the engagement process. So we attended the Spotlight on Stockton event. Feedback that we heard through conversations there generally revolved around the need for additional shelters and shade at bus stops, lighting of the pedestrian spaces, improved crosswalks along the corridor, and improved and separated bus and bike infrastructure at the bus stop locations. We also had an online community survey that went out earlier in 2023. There were 70 respondents to that survey, and the most common feedback we heard in terms of need for amenities included, again, improved shelter and shade at bus stops, higher frequency of service along the route, real-time information on when buses were coming, as well as lighting. And then from an access perspective, again, additional pedestrian crossings and signals and wider sidewalks were both high frequent responses to the survey. Next slide. So after identifying potential improvements at each bus stop, we went through a prioritization process. We evaluated each of the bus stops in 4 categories. Accessibility, which was given the highest priority in the weighting system that we utilized. And in this, we looked at both the accessibility of the bus stop. Is there a landing area and sufficient maneuverability within the bus stop? And then looked at the access to the bus stop. And so bus stops that had issues in terms of accessibility were scored higher on the prioritization process. We also evaluated the right-of-way, which plays into the feasibility of making improvements. So areas or locations where bus stop improvements and amenities could be added without right-of-way acquisition scored higher in the prioritization process. Third most weighted was the ridership. So looking at how many users were using the bus stop in order to try to facilitate reaching a larger portion of the community with these improvements. And we also looked at cost, but this was the lowest priority in the process. Next slide. So just a kind of an overview of some of the proposed improvements. So from an accessibility perspective, we looked at improving the boarding and the lighting areas, making sure there was a large enough landing area for ramp deployment and maneuverability. When we improved bus stops, we looked at providing a minimum 6-foot wide sidewalk for access to the bus stops, as well as upgraded curb ramps at the nearest intersection. Amenities that were proposed ranged based on the number of riders at each station, but generally include shelters, benches, trash receptacles, braille signage, system and route maps, as well as pedestrian scale lighting. And additionally, we proposed adding in real-time information sign at some locations, as well as improved and additional pedestrian crossings throughout the corridor. As Kevin mentioned, all these are conceptual and high level at this point in terms of identifying need and potential solutions, as well as costs. And as projects are realized, more detailed evaluation will be taking place to identify specific improvements. Next slide. So at the end of our prioritization process, we grouped projects into 4 categories: high, medium, low, and quick implementation project. So the quick implementation projects are projects where there were minimum improvements required based on the process we went through. So most of these were a need for a bus stop flag or some sort of signage, or there was a trash receptacle missing, relatively low cost and quick turnaround improvements that could be made. So we separated those out and then grouped the other projects into 3 categories. The high priority projects typically revolved around those that had access issues either at the bus stop or getting to the bus stop themselves, as well as stations that or bus stops that have higher ridership. Low priority projects were the locations that did not have any access issues, so they were already compliant in terms of the bus stop and the access themselves, as well as having low ridership numbers, so that there were not many improvements that could be made and wouldn't benefit a large number of riders. And then kind of the remaining projects were put in a medium priority project grouping that had some access issues, a medium level of ridership. There were benefits to be had, but it did not benefit as many riders or make as large of an impact as those identified as high priority projects. Next slide, please. So here's a example of a potential high priority project. The Lawrence Drive on the southbound direction. The existing sidewalk, as you can see in the image here, is narrow. There is not an accessible landing space for ramp deployment. There is no shelter or shade or any other amenities aside from the bench. And so this was a bus stop that scored highly in the process and was grouped in the high priority project. Proposed improvements here include adding in additional space in the landscape median or the landscape strip to provide accessibility at the station platform, as well as adding in the standard station amenities of shelter, trash can, signage, etc., as well as in a potential longer term project looking at improvements to the bus bike interface, as we heard in the public outreach. Next slide, please. And this kind of summarizes a little bit what I said on the last one, but 43 daily riders at this bus stop location, and no without any landing area and narrow sidewalks. So proposed improvements would include widening the sidewalk to accommodate the bus platform and landing areas throughout the station footprint itself, and then adding a shelter with a bench, pedestrian scale lighting, trash can system and route maps, as well as braille signage. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it back to Kevin if he has any closing remarks or the next steps.
At this point in time, we just would like to get any feedback from the MAC about the process or the plan itself. Like, again, before questions start, this is a conceptual design that will be further looked into as we move forward with the funding from SACOG. So there'll be more opportunities to hear from that working group that includes the city, the county, and STA and ourselves. So more information will be provided in the next year to 2 years. That's what is expected for that environmental process to go through. So I'm not sure how to do this.
Okay. Well, I'll call for some questions and comments from MAC members here in this room. Any comments or questions? Oh, Alan.
Yes, I was wondering for the Stockton Boulevard way, can they prioritize the time stops like at Fruit Ridge and Stockton, Broadway and Stockton? Those stop at Fruit Ridge and Stockton has been downgraded. They used to have a bench. It's no longer there. It's hard to get around a pole between the sidewalk and the vegetation part to get to the next bus stop. I had a hard time getting through there just to get onto the bus because they didn't stop in front of the pole. They stopped behind the pole. I think if they concentrate on the time stops, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And just I'll answer or maybe throw it back to you is the Fruit Ridge Road Plaza northbound, southbound. If that's the location you're discussing, it is a high priority project for us to fund if possible. So it is in the list of high priorities. If it's the Fruit Ridge Road northbound, southbound, it is a medium. So it's still very much in consideration to be funded at that location, those two locations.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions from members here in the room? Okay, MAC members attending virtually. Okay, public comments. Jeff Tartagia, one quick question, please, sir.
I believe you're starting down at Florin. How far up Stockton Boulevard, or are you deviating off to Broadway in regards to this corridor? Does that make sense? Because I don't think you're going up right Folsom Boulevard on Stockton, where you've got the railroad tracks and light rail and everything else. So didn't see that excluded.
So that is, correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think to answer the question is we are sticking to Stockton Boulevard itself, from Ellis Avenue, which is in the county, all the way to where we looked at T Street as it connected. But that's the limits of the study. So we did stick to Stockton Boulevard because that was the parameters that we gave Nelson Nygaard to look at. We didn't go much further than that. We really try to focus on this corridor beyond that. Hopefully, if there is any missing between this document and James Drake's document that he created with the bus stop improvement plan for the whole county, that we can still fill that in due time and make it for versions of that to make it better.
All right. Thanks very much, folks. One thing I would ask Kevin, one of you guys could send a copy of your presentation to Priscilla. Oh, you have it? Okay. Okay. Yep. She's got it. So because people might want a copy of it.
Absolutely.
A lot of good work.
Thank you for the time.
Oh, thank you folks for coming and presenting. I appreciate it very much. So, okay, moving on. Other business, are there any announcements or requests for information from MAC members? Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just as an announcement, in line with what was said by James Corliss, there's also another legislative effort. It's stalled for this year, but they're going to take it up again in January. AB 540, and that effort is to modernize and increase funding for the CTSAs, such as SAC-RT operates with SAC-RT Go. So we might want to keep an eye on that effort as well.
Oh, excellent. Thanks for that information. Sorry it got stalled this year. Okay, any other comments? Jeff Tartagia, quickly.
My comment is recently been heard inquiries about the I-80 elevator. Apparently one side is down again, and I just bring up the question is when is the MAC going to be considering that be in the annual review to make sure that the elevators and surrounding area of I-80 is checked on, because it had not been checked on in a while to see that you had a problem, and you have a problem again.
Okay, Jeff, thanks very much for bringing that to our attention, and we will certainly consider that in the near future. Okay, seeing nothing else, I want to remind people that the next MAC meeting will take place on July 13. That's postponed a week because of the 4th of July holiday. So July 13, and we'll meet here again. Thanks for all of your attendance. And do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn, Helen O'Connell.
Okay, motion. Do anybody want to second that? All right, Alan, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed. We're adjourned, folks.